It all began with sunshine, literally. I had just moved into what looked like a quiet, sustainable neighborhood tucked beneath rolling hills and open skis. After years in the city, this place seemed like paradise. Trees lined the streets, homes were well maintained without feeling sterile, and most importantly, there was space. Space to breathe, space to live, space to finally pursue my dream of sustainable living. With rising electricity costs nationwide, I decided to invest in solar power. It was not a small decision financially, but it aligned with everything I believed in. Clean energy, independence, responsibility toward our planet. I spent weeks researching the best systems and finally equipped my roof with state-of-the-art panels that gleamed under the morning light. The installation team said it was one of the most efficient systems they had installed all year. I felt proud watching them work, knowing I was making a positive impact while also saving on long-term costs. The first month was blissful. My energy meter barely moved, and I even generated excess power that fed back into the grid. I introduced myself to neighbors gradually, finding most of them friendly and welcoming. Many expressed interest in my solar setup, asking questions about cost and efficiency. A few even mentioned they were considering similar installations. It seemed I had found not just a house, but a community of like-minded people. That sense of belonging lasted exactly 3 weeks and 4 days. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was during the neighborhood summer barbecue at the community park. I was standing by the drinks table, chatting with an elderly couple who lived 2 doors down, when I noticed a woman staring at me from across the lawn. She wore designer sunglasses, had perfectly highlighted hair, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who was used to being obeyed. She approached with purpose, an artificial smile stretched across her face that never quite reached her eyes. "You must be the new resident on Maple Street," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I am Deborah Winters, president of the Sunnyvale Estates Homeowners Association. Everyone calls me Deb, but never Debbie." Her gaze drifted deliberately up toward my roof, visible just over the park trees. "Those solar panels of yours are quite noticeable." I smiled, assuming she was impressed. "Thank you. They are a high-efficiency model, already saving me a bundle." Her smile tightened. "That is the problem. They clash with our community aesthetic standards. We have very specific guidelines about external modifications, especially ones so visible from the street." I blinked, confused. "I got all the proper permits from the city. The installation company checked the local codes." "City permits do not override HOA bylaws," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "We have standards to maintain property values. Those panels might be functional, but they are an eyesore. I will need to bring this up at the next board meeting." Before I could respond, she had turned on her heel, leaving me standing there, drink in hand, utterly bewildered. The elderly couple beside me exchanged knowing glances. "That is Karen for you," the woman whispered, despite Deborah introducing herself as Deb. "We just try to stay off her radar." 3 days later, the first letter appeared in my mailbox. Official HOA letterhead. Warning about improper lawn height, though I had mowed just the day before. 2 days after that, another notice about incorrect trash can placement. Then a third about unauthorized external modifications with a reference to the solar panels. Each letter was signed by Deborah Winters, HOA president, with a surprisingly aggressive flourish on the signature. I set the letters aside. I had dealt with power-tripping administrators before. This would blow over. I was in compliance with city regulations, and surely an HOA could not prevent environmentally friendly improvements. Besides, several other homes had solar panels, though admittedly smaller systems than mine. I could not have been more wrong. Deborah, or Karen, as neighbors secretly called her, was just warming up. Her power trip was about to become a full-scale invasion, and my sunny new beginning was about to enter some very dark clouds. What started as occasional notices soon turned into a weekly ritual. Every Friday, like clockwork, a new HOA violation letter would appear in my mailbox. The accusations grew increasingly absurd. One claimed my garden hose was inconsistent with neighborhood standards because it was green instead of the apparently acceptable beige or brown. Another cited my bird feeder as an unauthorized food distribution system attracting wildlife. But the most aggressive notices always circled back to my solar panels. Then came the fines: $100 for unauthorized exterior modifications, $200 for unregistered energy systems, $300 for failure to comply with previous citations. The amounts escalated with each letter, along with the threats. Failure to remit payment will result in a lien being placed on your property. I began researching HOA laws in our state, discovering that while they had significant power, they were also bound by certain regulations themselves. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to address these concerns directly. It was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. I arrived 10 minutes early, documentation in hand, ready for a rational discussion. What I found was anything but rational. The meeting room was already filled with board members when I arrived. Deborah sat at the center of a long table, flanked by 4 others who looked at me with the same disapproving expression their leader wore. The few regular homeowners who attended sat quietly in folding chairs, eyes down, like schoolchildren afraid of being called on by a strict teacher. Deborah called the meeting to order precisely at 7:00 p.m. She moved through the agenda with military efficiency until reaching a new item: vote on amendment to external fixture regulations. My stomach tightened. The board proposes an amendment to Section 5, Paragraph C of the Community Bylaws, she announced without looking up from her papers. All power-generating equipment must be installed in non-visible locations or concealed from street view. This includes but is not limited to solar panels, wind turbines, and generator systems. I raised my hand, but she continued as if I were invisible. The measure addresses growing concerns about aesthetic inconsistency and potential property value impact. All in favor. 4 hands shot up instantly, her entire board. Opposed? She finally looked at me, eyebrow arched. My hand was already raised, along with 2 other homeowners. The measure passes, she declared with a smirk. Effective immediately. I stood up. Excuse me, but I believe proper procedure requires notification to all homeowners before bylaws can be amended. And I have documentation showing my installation was compliant with all regulations at the time it was completed. Deborah's eyes narrowed. You were notified. It was in the community newsletter last month. There was no mention of solar panels in the newsletter, I countered. I read it thoroughly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. A woman in the back row looked down at her hands. A man near the door suddenly became very interested in his shoes. No one would meet my eyes. Later that night, I found an older copy of the newsletter online. There had been no mention of the proposed amendment. When I accessed the same link the next day, suddenly there it was. A small notice buried on page 4, clearly backdated. She had altered the digital copy after our confrontation. The following morning, Deborah herself appeared at my door. She wore tennis whites and that same artificial smile, but her eyes were cold. I wanted to personally deliver this, she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a formal demand. Remove the solar panels within 30 days or face legal action from the HOA. I kept my voice level. These panels were legally installed. The new amendment cannot be retroactively applied. She leaned in slightly, dropping her voice. You will take those things down or we will take everything, your choice. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and your front bushes need trimming. Expect a notice about that tomorrow. That night I began documenting everything, photographing each letter, recording dates and times of every interaction, saving emails and newsletters. I requested copies of the original HOA bylaws from the county recorder's office. I discovered that amendments indeed required 30 days' notice to all homeowners before a vote could be held. Deborah had bypassed legal procedure. She had not just bent the rules, she had broken them. As weeks passed, I noticed neighbors avoiding eye contact when I waved. Whispers stopped when I approached at the mailbox cluster. No one wanted to be seen associating with the HOA's newest target. Karen had succeeded in isolating me, but she had no idea who she was dealing with or what was coming. The night it happened, I heard nothing. No footsteps on the roof. No tools clanking. No voices outside my window. Just the peaceful silence of suburban night, occasionally broken by a distant dog bark or the hum of an air conditioner. I slept soundly, unaware that my property was being violated in the most direct way possible. The morning sun woke me as it always did, streaming through my east-facing windows. I made coffee, checked emails, and eventually stepped outside to retrieve the morning newspaper. That was when I saw it, glass sparkling in my driveway like diamond dust. I looked up and my heart dropped to my stomach. My solar panels were destroyed, not just damaged, destroyed. Glass shattered across every panel, mounting brackets twisted and bent. Wires yanked out and cut, dangling like the entrails of a butchered animal. Someone had systematically demolished the entire system with what must have been hammers, crowbars, and wire cutters. This was not random vandalism. This was calculated destruction. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and called the police. While waiting for them to arrive, I remembered my security cameras. I had installed them after the harassment began, a basic system covering the front, back, and sides of the house. I rushed to my computer and pulled up the previous night's footage. There it was. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck with its lights off had pulled up across the street. Three figures emerged, two men and what appeared to be a teenage boy. They moved with purpose, carrying a ladder and tools. The video quality was not perfect, but it was clear enough to identify faces. The boy was unmistakably Tyler Winters, Deborah's son. The others I recognized as John Mercer and Pete Daniels, both HOA board members. The footage showed them setting up the ladder against my house, climbing onto my roof, and methodically destroying every panel. They worked quickly, efficiently, as if they had planned it all out. Occasionally, they would laugh or high-five. At one point, Tyler looked directly at the camera and smirked before continuing the destruction. When the police finally arrived, I showed them the footage. The officer watched it, face impassive, then closed his notebook. "This looks like a civil matter to me," he said. "Civil matter? They trespassed and destroyed thousands of dollars of my property," I protested. "You will need to take it up with your HOA," he replied. "These kinds of disputes happen all the time in neighborhoods like this. My suggestion is to work it out amongst yourselves." I could not believe what I was hearing. "I have video evidence of destruction of property." He sighed. "Look, I will file a report, but do not expect much. HOA disputes are complicated. Courts prefer these things handled internally." He handed me a card with a case number scribbled on it. "Good luck." That afternoon, I printed still images from the security footage and walked directly to Deborah's house. She answered the door in workout clothes, not a hair out of place despite the intensive home cardio playing on her television. "Can I help you?" she asked, not bothering with the fake smile this time. I handed her the photos. "I want compensation for the damage your son and your board members did to my property last night." She glanced at the images, then laughed, actually laughed in my face. These could be anyone, and even if it was them, they were likely performing a community service. Those panels were in violation of our bylaws. They were grandfathered in, you know that. This was criminal vandalism. She handed the photos back. "Prove it was us. Prove those grainy images are who you say they are. Prove you did not stage this yourself for insurance money." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No one will believe you over me. I have been running this community for 15 years. You have been here, 3 months?" She closed the door in my face. Within days, my electricity bills tripled. Without my solar system, I was forced back onto the main power grid full-time. The timing could not have been worse. A summer heat wave meant my air conditioning ran constantly. When I contacted the HOA about compensation for the damages, their response was predictable. My installation had been unpermitted, according to their bylaws, and thus they bore no responsibility. Friends suggested I sue, but lawyers I consulted warned that HOA litigation could drag on for years, costing more than the solar system itself. The community pool parking lot now featured a new sign. "Residents with outstanding HOA fines may not use facilities." A pointed message aimed directly at me, as I had refused to pay their fraudulent fines. Neighbors who had previously been friendly now avoided me entirely. I had become a pariah, the troublemaker who dared challenge Karen and her reign. At neighborhood gatherings, I stood alone, watching Deborah hold court like a queen among her subjects. She would occasionally glance my way, that smug smile playing at her lips. But I was not defeated. I was calculating. On the surface, I smiled back. I waved politely when we passed on the street. I even attended HOA meetings, sitting quietly in the back, not because I had given up, but because I knew something Karen did not. I was not just a homeowner with broken solar panels. I was the silent owner of something far more powerful, and Karen's days of ruling this neighborhood were numbered. Karen thought she had cut off my power, but she never asked herself, where does her power come from? Long before I moved to Sunnyvale Estates, I had made my fortune in renewable energy investments, not from installing systems, but from owning the infrastructure that supported them. Years ago, I had identified this region as perfect for green energy development. The rural electric cooperative that served this area was struggling financially, looking for investors to help modernize their grid and expand renewable capabilities. Through a carefully structured network of holding companies and investment vehicles, I became the cooperative's largest shareholder. To the outside world, Sunrise Energy Solutions was just another faceless corporation. But I controlled 51% of its shares. I directed its operations through a board I had personally selected. No one in the neighborhood knew, not even my closest neighbors. It was not information I broadcast. Not because it was a secret exactly, but because I valued my privacy and the ability to live without the burden of people knowing my financial status. What made this particularly interesting in my current situation was simple. Sunnyvale Estates, including the HOA and all its facilities, received its power exclusively through my grid. The community clubhouse, the pool filtration system, the security gates, the ornamental lighting along the main boulevard, all of it dependent on infrastructure I controlled. Even more intriguing was what my team discovered during a routine audit the week after my solar panels were destroyed. The HOA had been cutting corners. Their offices had established unauthorized connections to the emergency backup systems, systems designed for critical infrastructure during outages, not for everyday office use. They had failed to pay several surcharge fees for peak usage periods. And most damning of all, they had installed an unpermitted connection to power their new security cameras, the very cameras Deborah used to monitor the neighborhood for violations. I scheduled a meeting with my legal team. 3 attorneys sat across from me in a downtown office as I laid out the situation. "What are my options?" I asked. Margaret, my head counsel, reviewed the documents. "They have committed multiple violations of their service agreement. The unauthorized connections alone would justify immediate service suspension until remediation occurs." "Could it appear as retaliation for my personal dispute with them?" I asked. James, the contract specialist, shook his head. "Not if you follow proper procedure. Send formal notifications of the violations. Give them standard time to address the issues, usually 48 hours for critical safety violations like unauthorized connections. Document everything. If they fail to comply, service suspension is not just justified, it is mandated by safety protocols. And if they claim it is personal, the timing is coincidental," Margaret replied. "You did not create these violations. You merely discovered them during routine monitoring. Your personal dispute is irrelevant to the company's obligation to maintain grid integrity." I nodded slowly. "Prepare the notices, use company letterhead, standard language, nothing that connects to me personally." The following day, official notices from Sunrise Energy Solutions were delivered to the HOA office by courier. The documents detailed each violation, included photographic evidence, and provided a 48-hour window for acknowledgement and remediation plans. The final paragraph stated clearly, "Failure to address these critical safety and contract violations will result in service interruption to non-essential systems until compliance is achieved." I drove past the HOA office that afternoon. Through the windows, I could see Deborah and her board members huddled around a table, the notice papers spread before them. Her face was flushed, her gestures animated. I allowed myself a small smile as I continued down the street. That evening, a community-wide email arrived in residents' inboxes. The subject line read, "Important, false claims against your HOA." The message, signed by Deborah, was a masterpiece of misdirection. Dear valued residents, it has come to our attention that a disgruntled homeowner has connections to our power provider and is attempting to disrupt community services through false claims and threats. Rest assured, your HOA is in full compliance with all regulations. This is nothing more than a bitter attempt at revenge from someone who refuses to follow our community standards. We are addressing this nuisance and will keep you informed. Deborah Winters, President. Reading her email, I felt a strange sense of calm. Karen had taken my bait completely. She had exposed herself as knowing the connection between me and the power company, information that was not public and certainly not mentioned in the official notices. And she had done so in writing to the entire community. The 48-hour deadline approached. No response came from the HOA, no acknowledgement of the violations, no remediation plan, just Deborah's public denial and private certainty that her power was absolute. She was about to learn otherwise. I spent those 48 hours meticulously documenting everything. I recorded phone calls with the energy company's service department where the HOA office repeatedly dismissed concerns about their unauthorized connections. I photographed the illegal power taps. I compiled their history of unpaid surcharges dating back 3 years. I created a complete paper trail proving this was not personal but procedural. When the deadline arrived, I was sitting in my home office, connected to the power grid's management system through secure channels. On my screens, I could see the status of every connection in the neighborhood, including the special highlight for the HOA facilities. At exactly noon, I initiated the protocol. I did not just flip a switch. That would have been crude and possibly dangerous. Instead, I executed a controlled, sector-specific service interruption targeting only non-essential services to HOA-managed properties. The community's residential homes remained untouched. Only the HOA office, clubhouse, decorative lighting, and surveillance systems were affected. The system showed confirmation. Service interruption executed successfully. Affected nodes 17, status offline. Through my own security cameras, which ran on independent power, I watched as the HOA office across the park went dark. The overhead lights extinguished. Computer screens blinked off mid-use. The elaborate fountain in front sputtered to a stop. The electronic gate to the members-only section of the clubhouse froze half open. Within minutes, figures emerged from the building. First came the administrative assistant, looking confused, checking her phone. Then 2 board members, pointing at the roof as if the problem might be visible from outside. And finally, Deborah herself, erupting through the doors like a volcano, phone pressed to her ear, free hand gesticulating wildly. I zoomed in with my camera. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief. She paced back and forth on the stone pathway, her voice occasionally carrying across the distance. This is unacceptable. Do you know who I am? I demand immediate restoration. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Deborah attempted to maintain her composure before them, but the strain showed. When the operations manager from Sunrise Energy arrived, a planned visit I had scheduled, she practically accosted him, jabbing her finger into his chest. He calmly handed her a folder containing printouts of all the violations, the missed deadline notices, and most importantly, copies of the service agreement she herself had signed 3 years prior. The crowning moment came when she demanded to speak to the owner of the company. The operations manager glanced in the direction of my house and said simply, "I am not at liberty to disclose that information, ma'am." By evening, the neighborhood was buzzing. Texts and calls bounced between homes. The community message board lit up with questions. A few neighbors connected the dots quickly, remembering my background in energy investments. Others remained confused but increasingly suspicious of the HOA's role in the outage. At 7 p.m., Deborah sent another community email. Due to sabotage of our community systems by parties who will face severe legal consequences, tonight's HOA meeting will be held on the clubhouse lawn. Bring flashlights. Attendance is mandatory for all homeowners. I smiled at the word mandatory. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. More importantly, the community was beginning to see it too. The impromptu meeting that night was illuminated by car headlights pointed at a makeshift speaking area. About half the neighborhood showed up, far more than the typical meeting attendance. I stood at the back, observing quietly as Deborah attempted to rally her remaining supporters. "This outage is the result of one person's vendetta against our community standards," she declared, carefully avoiding nomming me directly. "The same person who refuses to comply with our aesthetic guidelines now wants to punish all of us." A voice called from the crowd, "Is it true they found illegal connections at the clubhouse?" Deborah faltered. "That is a gross mischaracterization of standard power distribution." Another voice, "Did we really not pay our power bills?" "All bills are current," she snapped. "These are fabricated violations." Then came the question she feared most, from elderly Mr. Peterson, who rarely spoke at meetings. "Is it true that the new resident on Maple Street owns the power company?" A hush fell over the gathering. All eyes turned toward me. For the first time since moving in, I felt the community's full attention, not as an outsider, but as someone with answers they needed. I simply nodded once, offering no elaboration. The whispers began immediately. Deborah tried to regain control, her voice rising to a shrill command. "This meeting is about community solidarity against extortion, not rumors about who owns what." But it was too late. The seed was planted. The power dynamic had visibly shifted. As people began drifting away from her makeshift podium, I overheard snippets that told me everything. Did she really send people to destroy his solar panels? I always thought those fines were excessive. Remember when she cited the Johnsons for their daughter's wheelchair ramp? The tide was turning, and Deborah knew it. The look she gave me across the dark lawn contained something new beneath the anger: fear. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. the following evening. Not by Deborah this time, but by the vice president, who had quietly reached out to me about restoring power for the meeting itself. I agreed with one condition. The meeting would be properly recorded and open to all homeowners with full speaking privileges. He readily accepted. Word spread quickly. By 6:30, the community center was packed wall-to-wall. People who had never attended a meeting stood shoulder to shoulder with regular participants. The energy in the room was electric, anticipation mixed with long-suppressed frustration. I arrived exactly at 7, carrying a leather portfolio containing everything I had compiled. 3 attorneys from my legal team followed, each carrying identical folders. We took seats in the front row, directly facing the board table where Deborah already sat, attempting to project confidence despite her obvious tension. The vice president called the meeting to order. "Given recent events, we have adjusted tonight's agenda to address community concerns about HOA management, power service interruptions, and allegations regarding property damage." Deborah immediately tried to seize control. "Before we proceed with this irregular agenda, I move that we address the hostile actions taken against community property by—" "Point of order," I interrupted, rising from my seat. "Before accusations are made, I request the floor to present evidence relevant to tonight's discussion." The vice president nodded. "Granted." I approached the center of the room. "For those I have not met, my name is Alexander Chen. I moved here 3 months ago, drawn by what I believed was a community that valued sustainability and respectful coexistence." I opened my portfolio and removed the first document, my original property purchase agreement. When I bought my home, I reviewed the HOA bylaws carefully. At that time, Section 5, Paragraph C explicitly permitted solar installations with proper permits, which I obtained. I displayed the city permits and original HOA guidelines. These documents were altered after I installed my system. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I continued, methodically presenting evidence: the backdated newsletter, the falsified amendment vote, the escalating and fabricated violations. With each revelation, the room's temperature seemed to rise. Then came the security footage. I had transferred it to a portable projector, which my legal team now set up. On this night 2 weeks ago, my legally installed solar system was deliberately destroyed. I ask you to watch carefully." The room fell silent as the video played. The three figures, clearly identifiable, methodically demolishing my property. Tyler Winters looking directly at the camera and smirking. John and Pete high-fiving as panels shattered. When the lights came back on, all eyes turned to Deborah. Her face had gone pale, but she quickly recovered. That video could be manipulated, and even if it were genuine, the installation was ultimately determined to be non-compliant. The board was merely enforcing. "The board has no authority to destroy private property," my attorney interjected. "That's criminal vandalism and trespassing, at minimum. We have already filed civil charges nomming the individuals involved and the HOA as an entity." Deborah's expression hardened. "This community will not be held hostage by threats and technicalities. If you pursue this vindictive course, the HOA's legal team will." "Your legal team resigned this morning," I interrupted, sliding another document onto the projector. It was an email from the HOA's law firm, withdrawing representation due to potential criminal liability concerns and lack of good faith disclosures from leadership. The room erupted. Homeowners who had suffered similar treatment began calling out their own stories. Arbitrary fines, rejected improvement requests, personal vendettas masked as rule enforcement. Years of suppressed grievances poured forth in a torrent of frustration. Through it all, I remained calm, letting the community's voice build naturally. When the vice president finally managed to restore order, he looked directly at Deborah. "Given the evidence presented and the community response, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current HOA president." Deborah jumped to her feet. "This is an ambush, an illegal meeting manipulation. I will sue everyone in this room personally." The vice president remained steady. "The bylaws, Section 2, Paragraph A, allow for leadership removal votes at any properly convened meeting with a quorum present. We have well over a quorum tonight." The vote was called. One by one, hands raised against Deborah's continued leadership. Even her longtime allies on the board avoided her gaze as they raised their hands. The final tally, 78 against, 3 in favor. "Effective immediately," the vice president announced, "Deborah Winters is removed as HOA president." Applause erupted, along with a few cheers. As the noise subsided, several neighbors approached me, offering quiet thanks or apologetic handshakes for their earlier silence. Others surrounded Deborah, demanding explanations for specific grievances. She gathered her belongings and pushed through the crowd toward the exit, her son trailing behind her. At the door, she turned back toward me, eyes narrowed. "This is not over, not by a long shot." I met her gaze calmly. "Actually, Deborah, I believe the vote just confirmed it is." As she stormed out, the community began the process of rebuilding. The vice president was named interim president, with instructions to plan a proper election within 30 days. Committees formed spontaneously to review the bylaws, audit the finances, and create new procedures for amendments. I stayed late, answering questions about what had happened and why. By the time I walked home under the restored streetlights, I felt a weight lifted. Not just because Karen had been dethroned, but because a community had found its voice again. Justice was not just about bringing someone down. It was about lifting everything else up. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The new interim board, led by former Vice President Robert Garcia, immediately addressed the most pressing issues. They froze all outstanding fines pending review, restored access to community facilities for all residents, and most importantly, established a transparent process for bylaw revisions. My first act was to hire the best solar installation company in the state to rebuild my system. This time, I went even bigger, a cutting-edge integrated system that would serve as both power generation and a showcase for sustainable living. The installation team worked efficiently, and within 2 weeks my roof once again gleamed with panels, more advanced and numerous than before. What surprised me was the community response. Instead of criticism, neighbors expressed interest. Several even asked for recommendations and quotes for their own homes. Robert approached me about hosting an informational session on sustainable energy for the neighborhood. "We would like to make this a model green community," he explained. "Your expertise would be invaluable." The city itself took notice. The mayor, who had been pushing a sustainability initiative, arranged a small ribbon-cutting ceremony for my completed system. Local news covered the event, highlighting how neighborhood resistance to renewable energy had been overcome. I carefully avoided mentioning Deborah or the previous conflicts, focusing instead on the positive changes and community spirit. As for Deborah, she became increasingly isolated. The vandalism case proceeded through legal channels, with her son and the two board members accepting plea deals that included community service and restitution. Deborah herself fought the charges, but her position weakened daily as more evidence emerged of her mismanagement of HOA funds and abuse of authority. 3 weeks after the emergency meeting, a moving truck appeared outside her house in the middle of the night. By morning, the property was empty, a realtor's sign already staked in the front lawn. She had fled rather than face the community she had tyrannized for so long. No goodbyes, no apologies, just a silent disappearance into the darkness. At the next official HOA meeting, I was unanimously nominated to join the board. I politely declined. "I appreciate the trust," I told them, "but my role is better suited as an advisor on energy issues rather than a governing member. I believe in separation of powers." Instead, I focused on using my resources to help the community in more direct ways. I established a solar credit program through the Power Cooperative, allowing excess energy generated by my system to offset costs for elderly residents on fixed incomes. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been struggling with rising electricity bills on her limited pension, cried when I explained her first bill would be reduced by 70%. "No one has ever looked out for us like this," she said, patting my hand with her weathered fingers. 6 months after the confrontation, our neighborhood had become a different place. Gardens flourished without arbitrary restrictions. Children played freely on front lawns. Solar panels appeared on several roofs, each installation celebrated rather than condemned. Property values, contrary to Deborah's fear-mongering, actually increased as word spread about our progressive, sustainable community. Every evening as sunset approaches, I sit on my front porch and watch my home's energy systems transition seamlessly from solar to battery power. The subtle hum of efficient technology is the only sound as darkness falls around me. Yet while the neighborhood streets dim, my house remains illuminated, clean, sustainable light pushing back against the night. That light represents more than electricity. It symbolizes the choice between power and empowerment. Deborah wielded power like a weapon, using it to control and diminish others. I chose empowerment, using resources not to dominate but to elevate an entire community. As I sit in that self-generated light each night, I think about how the true measure of strength is not how firmly you can hold others down, but how high you can help them rise. Deborah never understood that the brightest light comes not from extinguishing others, but from igniting potential that benefits everyone. In the end, her darkness could not overcome our collective light, and that is the most satisfying revenge of all.